Emily's first night was auctioned off for a staggering $300,000. Maggie hinted it was someone familiar. Dressed up and holding a tray, Emily nervously approached the 888 VIP room. For 3 years, Emily had worked at this nightclub, always preserving a clean image. But now, she needed a significant sum of money, forcing her to ask Maggie for this arrangement.
Since Maggie mentioned it might be someone familiar, it must be that regular guest.
She adjusted her clothes, put on a faint smile, and pushed open the door to the private room.
Mr. Zhou.
Her words were cut off by the dim lighting and the people inside. Several men sat on sofas with women nestled in their arms. The laughter ceased as everyone turned to look at Emily. She immediately spotted a man in the corner. His legs crossed, he exuded an aura of indifference and darkness. His familiar features made Emily's face turn pale instantly.
Sorry, wrong room, she stammered, turning to leave.
Hey, are you Emily? He grabbed her, while another adjusted the lights, revealing Emily in her short maid outfit, holding a tray.
Gasps filled the room as the men whispered among themselves, disbelief evident. Emily struggled to free herself, but the man dragged her to the corner, throwing her at the feet of another.
Ethan, I spent $300,000 to buy this first night for you.
Is that so? He chuckled, his cold gaze wandering over Emily's face.
Suddenly, he extended his foot, the tip of his polished shoe lifting Emily's chin.
A woman I was with for 2 years for $5,000 can still package herself as a virgin?
The room erupted in laughter, except for Emily, whose face turned even paler.
It's all for the money, no choice, she suppressed the pain, forcing a charming smile as she touched his thigh. Mr. Johnson, if you still want to keep me, the price has gone up.
A woman like you, I find repulsive.
His words cut into Emily's heart, but she had to force a smile. James took out a cigarette, and a woman immediately leaned over to light it for him. He took a couple of puffs and pointed to the stack of cash on the table.
Please me, and all this money is yours.
Wow, is Mr. Johnson planning to give us a live show?
The others laughed, their eyes all on Emily, while James sat there, looking at her coldly, like a king on his throne. Such a humiliating request, Emily would have politely left in the past. But now, she needed the money. Ignoring the stares, Emily leaned against his chest, but the man remained expressionless, his eyes still filled with contempt.
School beauty, this is boring. Take off your clothes, maybe then you'll get the money.
Emily's body stiffened. James seemed to notice her hesitation, took a puff of his cigarette, and blew the smoke in her face.
Isn't it all for the money? What, can't even take off your clothes?
If that's what you want, of course, she smiled, her hands reaching for the zipper at the back of her dress.
As the zipper came down, exposing her to everyone, Emily bit her lip, enduring the humiliation. James glanced around, then looked at Emily, who was still undressing. His face darkened, and before Emily could react, he grabbed her hair and dragged her into the suite. Nearly half an hour later, James emerged from the suite, his suit immaculate, exuding elegance. He glanced at the woman lying in the bathtub, covered in bruises, sneered, and walked out. Emily quickly picked up her torn clothes, put them on, and followed him out.
Mr. Johnson, she grabbed his sleeve, smiling, what you did to me went beyond what was agreed. The price needs to go up.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions, she brushed her hair back. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. That day, Emily went to the changing room to get dressed for work when the hospital called to say that Alex's condition had relapsed. She dropped everything, ran out to hail a cab, and rushed to the hospital.
Alex, please, you must be okay.
When Emily arrived at the hospital, Alex had already undergone surgery. The doctor said his condition was temporarily stable.
I still recommend sending him abroad for surgery. The success rate is at least 50%.
Thank you, doctor.
Emily went to Alex's room and sat by his bed. 3 years ago, she lost everything in an accident, leaving only her young brother by her side. To afford his treatment, she even sold herself to a nightclub.
Alex, I will save you.
Half an hour later, Emily left the room. A few days ago, she had sold her first night and received a portion from the club, along with a tip from James, but it was far from enough for treatment abroad. She had to earn money desperately. In her haste, Emily didn't notice and bumped into someone.
Sorry.
But when she looked up and saw the familiar man, she froze.
It's okay.
The woman beside him smiled, quickly linking her arm with James as they walked past Emily.
Honey, how do you want to celebrate our second anniversary? The same as last year?
At that moment, Emily felt not only stiff but also cold all over. To send Alex abroad for treatment as soon as possible, Emily took on every job she could. As long as the pay was good, she even performed provocative dances in private rooms. One of Emily's regular clients, David Joe, came by.
If I had known it was your first night, I wouldn't have gone on that business trip abroad.
You've always been good to me. It's my greed for money.
Emily, if you're willing, I can help you leave this life. You know I care about you.
Emily subtly withdrew her hand. David had said this many times, but he was a married man with children. Even if he didn't get along with his wife, Emily didn't want to ruin someone else's marriage.
I know, but this job is too dirty. You're my only friend, and I don't want to taint your life.
Emily, you know I don't mind.
Emily shook her head, politely declining. After sending David away, James arrived shortly after, walking past Emily and entering a VIP room. That was one of the rooms Emily was responsible for, so she followed him in. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, a smile playing on her lips.
Mr. Johnson, what you did exceeded our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face showing disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, her smile both charming and determined.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face showing clear disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, her smile unwavering.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face twisted in disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James stared at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. Emily returned to her apartment around 6 o'clock. She busied herself in the kitchen, cooking and washing vegetables, feeling happy at the thought of them having dinner together later. But she waited until 8:30, and James still hadn't come back. Unable to wait any longer, Emily called him for the first time.
James, didn't you say you'd come back for dinner? When will you be home?
Do I need to inform you when I'll be back? Emily, you'd better remember your place.
With that, James hung up. Emily slowly put down her phone, looking at the table full of cold dishes, mocking herself inwardly.
Emily, what are you expecting?
The doctor had said that Alex's condition had improved, which was the happiest news Emily had heard in a long time. Frowning, Emily practiced smiling in the mirror repeatedly, afraid that her emotions might affect Alex.
Miss Emily, although the patient's condition has improved, I still recommend transferring him abroad for treatment as soon as possible. If we miss the window, even the best doctors won't be able to help.
I understand. Thank you, doctor.
As usual, she brought Alex his favorite food and toys. The simple joy of a child was always so easy to achieve. Seeing Alex's happy and contented expression, Emily felt that everything she did was worth it. She had no regrets.
Alex, as soon as I gather enough money, I'll take you abroad.
Okay.
Emily grasped Mr. Johnson's sleeve with a smile.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face showing clear disdain.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. Emily placed the dishes on the table and served him some rice. James stood there without moving.
I didn't know you were coming back, so I didn't prepare.
Sit down and eat with me.
Emily sat down hesitantly and served herself a bowl of rice. James put a lot of meat into her bowl, his expression still cold.
Eat more. You're too thin, it's not comfortable.
Emily instantly understood the implication behind his words, her face flushing. She silently cursed him for being a rogue. In reality, James just wanted her to eat more. His previous contempt for her had overshadowed any attention he might have paid to her. He had never really observed Emily closely. She had lost a lot of weight in a short period, her slender frame looking as if it could be blown away by the wind, making people worry. So he wanted her to eat more, but his words didn't come out as kindly. The meal was eaten in silence, but James felt a slight warmth and even a bit of satisfaction inside. Emily quietly cleaned up the dishes. James gestured for her to sit down beside him. Sitting next to James, Emily felt a sudden tension. She didn't know what he wanted to do. To her surprise, James handed her a card.
Here's 30,000. Consider it a bonus. Your regular payment will still be deposited into your account this month.
This meant that the money for Alex's surgery was one step closer. She could soon take Alex abroad for treatment. Thinking of this, Emily's eyes curved with joy, unable to suppress her happiness.
Thank you.
James's face remained cold, but inside, he felt a bit moved. That night, Emily performed exceptionally well in bed. She was genuinely involved. In the dark night, with the window open, moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. The low, heavy breathing inside made hearts race. Emily's fingers couldn't help but trace his firm jawline. Thinking of the insurmountable barriers between them, Emily felt a sudden sadness. Soon, it would all be over. She would leave him and no longer disrupt James's life. Emily allowed herself some indulgence that night. It was probably the first time the two of them had been so deeply entwined. From that day on, James often came to her place and would even call her to have dinner together. They lived almost like an ordinary married couple, with her waiting at home for her husband's return. James's attitude towards her also changed. He was no longer as violent as before. Emily cherished these moments. Their relationship gradually warmed, resembling a couple in love rather than the cold detachment of before. However, Emily's life was never that smooth. Just when she thought life could continue peacefully, someone had to disrupt it. Emily went to the supermarket to buy some groceries, but unexpectedly ran into someone she used to work with.
Emily! What a coincidence! I never thought I'd run into you here.
Emily was slightly surprised and hadn't even replied when Lisa warmly took her arm.
It's been so long. Come on, let me treat you to a meal. We need to catch up, the girls miss you.
Emily wasn't very comfortable with such warmth from others. Facing Lisa's enthusiasm, she didn't know how to respond but eventually nodded.
Let me treat you instead.
Perhaps it had been too long since they last met. Lisa chatted about many things. Finally, she turned the conversation with a curious look.
Emily, I heard you've been kept by that rich guy? Is it true?
Emily stirred her coffee in silence and smiled.
Yes, just like the rumors you've heard.
A flash of contempt and mockery crossed Lisa's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by a fake smile.
Emily, honestly, after working together for so long, I'm genuinely happy you found such a good place. But speaking of which, Mr. James is so handsome and wealthy. He's the dream of all our sisters. You've been with him for so long, you must really like him, right?
Her words were probing. Emily was stunned for a moment. Her life had no future, she was no longer pure. What right did she have to talk about love? The melancholy and bitterness in her eyes quickly vanished. She pursed her lips, her face showing a seductive smile, her tone slightly flippant.
Lisa, you should know better than anyone. In our line of work, what's there to talk about love? I'm just with James because he pays more and is generous.
Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, her smile tight.
Mr. Johnson, what you did exceeded our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face twisted in disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily's smile was bitter inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent. He walked away without another word. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face twisted in disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, her smile unwavering.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, a look of disgust on his face.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily's smile turned bitter inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money, and walked away. 5 years later. Since Emily's disappearance, James's life seemed unchanged. He continued living as he always had, still the model husband in everyone's eyes, and remained as attentive as ever to Sophia. But Emily suddenly returned, accompanied by David and her 4-year-old daughter, Lily.
What a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet Miss Emily here, right, James?
She glanced at James, whose eyes were bloodshot, as if he wanted to devour Emily alive. Emily appeared indifferent, not even glancing at James intentionally. There was no hatred or the tenderness of the past in her eyes.
Yes, my husband is in the maritime business, and this restaurant is owned by him. Feel free to come by any time.
She subtly hinted at her current life, making Sophia's face turn visibly unpleasant.
Mrs. Johnson, enjoy your meal. I'll take my leave.
After taking a few steps, James stood up, grabbed her hand tightly, and asked angrily.
Aren't you supposed to be gone?
Mr. James, you're hurting me. Let go.
James was still in shock. Seeing her alive and walking towards him had filled him with overwhelming joy, but once he regained his senses, he was consumed with anger. If she had been alive all these years, why hadn't she come to find him? The little girl, hearing her mother say she was in pain, immediately started kicking and punching him.
You bad man, let go of my mommy.
James's attention finally shifted from Emily to the little girl. He stared at her and asked Emily through gritted teeth.
Is she your child?
Lily, come to mommy.
But the little girl, unafraid of James, pouted her chubby cheeks and glared at him adorably.
Daddy said to protect mommy and not let her get hurt.
A surge of jealousy rose within James. He glared at Emily with a piercing gaze.
Mr. James, Mrs. Johnson is still here. What are you trying to do?
Sophia's fingers gripped the edge of the table, almost about to explode, but she maintained a faint smile, not revealing a trace of her anger.
Aren't you supposed to be gone? Why are you here?
You can consider me gone.
This statement hit James like a blow, causing him to release her hand in a daze. Emily nodded politely to Sophia and left with Lily. The news that Emily was still alive quickly reached Mrs. Johnson, thanks to Sophia, who went to her with a grievance. Using subtle and skillful words, Sophia made Mrs. Johnson feel threatened, not wanting her son to be bewitched by this woman again. So, Mrs. Johnson decisively went to find Emily. Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve, a smile playing on her lips.
Mr. Johnson, what you did went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money to be sent, and walked away. David patted her shoulder, stopping her from saying more. He smiled faintly.
Emily, you don't need to explain our relationship to me. I understand. Over the years, it's been you and Lily who have kept me company and made me happy.
Seeing his serious expression, Emily couldn't help but laugh.
Why are we suddenly being so formal? In any case, David, I owe you a lot. I hope I can repay you someday.
Hearing this, David's smile faded slightly. He looked at Emily earnestly.
What if I want you?
Emily was taken aback. She had been with David for so many years, and he had always maintained a respectful distance, never mentioning feelings. But since returning to the country, he seemed to have changed.
I was just joking, Emily. After all these years, I know you well. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do, now or ever.
They both smiled and moved past the topic. They had originally planned to go to the amusement park that evening, but David had an urgent matter to attend to, so the plan was cancelled. Emily took Lily out for a walk and bought some daily necessities at the mall. Her hands were full of items, all daily necessities, while Lily was excitedly exploring everything in the city. Returning to this city, Emily hadn't had time to rent a place. She had spent all her money on Alex's surgery and had no assets here. So David suggested she and Lily move into his villa. Emily hesitated, not because she cared about her reputation, but because she feared bringing trouble to David. Before she left the country, her situation had become widely known, and she was almost universally condemned as a homewrecker. If she stayed with David, public opinion would naturally target him as well.
Emily, I want to protect you and Lily. I don't need anything in return from you. But you know, I've gotten used to having you around. It's not easy for you alone. Have you thought about Lily's well-being if you continue to be on your own?
Emily lowered her eyes. She had only considered the immediate situation and hadn't thought carefully about Lily's future.
Emily, I see you and Lily as family now. I want to protect you both and not let anyone hurt you. But if you find your own happiness one day, I won't stand in your way.
His words made Emily's nose tingle with emotion. She realized how selfish she had been, dragging him along since they went to the States, and now back home, she was still a burden. Because what she was about to do next was inherently risky. David hired a nanny to take care of Emily and Lily. The nanny was very kind and attentive, and Lily liked her very much, sticking to her every day. Emily had little time left, so she needed to quickly investigate the evidence of Alex's death, a topic she had always been afraid to touch. She couldn't believe a young child would have such thoughts. Emily drove to the hospital. People were coming and going, and she stared intently at the spot in front of her car, where Alex had last fallen. The memories buried deep in her heart surged up. Her fingers, gripping the steering wheel, gradually tightened. She felt short of breath and quickly grabbed a bottle of water, drinking several gulps. Only then did her emotions calm down a bit. Hospitals generally don't allow people to view surveillance footage, and if someone was pressuring them from behind, it would be even more impossible. Emily sat in Dean Huang's office.
Miss Emily, this matter was quite a stir back then, but all reports about it were quickly withdrawn.
Dean, shouldn't my brother's death have a conclusion?
The dean's forehead was still sweating. He had thought this matter was over, but who would have thought Emily would come back and start investigating Alex's case from the beginning?
Dean Huang, I entrusted Alex to your hospital because I trusted you. But in the end? Such a young child jumped from a high building. Do you think that's possible?
Miss Emily, we have always felt sorry about your brother's case.
So let me investigate the surveillance footage from back then. I need to know what happened to my brother, who he met. If I don't even have this right, then I have the right to suspect that his death is related to you.
Under Emily's relentless pursuit, the dean finally agreed to let her investigate the surveillance footage from that year. In the surveillance room, the staff took a long time to find the videos related to Alex from 5 years ago. In the footage, just after Emily left the hospital, Sophia entered the ward. At first, she seemed to be having a pleasant conversation with Alex. But the last time, just before Alex jumped, she showed him some photos. After seeing those photos, Alex's emotions were visibly agitated. Seeing these heart-wrenching images, Emily's fingers dug deeply into her palms. She bit her lower lip tightly, the taste of blood spreading in her mouth.
Miss Emily, we understand your feelings as a family member, but if you think you can convict someone based on this video alone, it's impossible.
Emily returned to the villa from the hospital, feeling lost and desolate. She sat on the balcony, letting the cold wind blow, and exhaled deeply. She was deep in thought and didn't notice the footsteps behind her.
Emily, you're back?
Emily came back to her senses, suppressing the bitterness in her heart, and smiled at him.
You're back?
The balcony had no glass windows, so the wind was howling. David took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders.
It's so cold here. Let's go back to the living room.
It's okay. I want to sit here for a while. It's late, you should go to bed.
David knew her body better than his own after being with her for so many years. He immediately knew she wasn't feeling well. He turned back to the living room to get the medicine prepared for her and poured a cup of hot water. After taking the medicine, Emily's headache eased. She curled up and smiled at him.
David, thank you.
What's troubling you? If you need my help, just tell me. I'll do my best.
Emily believed what David said. If it weren't for him, she would have been in a far worse situation. Besides gratitude, she felt guilt towards him and didn't want to cause him any more trouble.
David, you know, I understand all the good you've done for me. If we had met at the right time, I would have chosen you without hesitation.
Her sudden words caught David off guard. He had thought he had a chance, but Emily's following words made him realize she had never let go of the person in her heart. The atmosphere between them grew silent, but it was the first time they had opened up to each other. David had always been cautious, fearing that his sudden approach might scare her. He had always been steady and measured in front of her. But now, he wanted to try harder, at least not to regret it later.
Emily, I respect all your choices, so you don't need to feel guilty towards me. Because I understand you. The Emily I know is a kind woman. You stick to your choices, and I will stick to mine. In this lifetime, I have only ever chosen you.
Emily hugged her knees, her eyes shimmering with tears. Only in front of David did she dare to drop her guard and be her true self. The two of them had a heartfelt conversation on the balcony. Emily watched the hospital footage over and over again. Although this behavior was essentially self-torture, she forced herself to try and find some clues in the video.
Suddenly, it started raining heavily outside. Emily stood up, and a wave of dizziness hit her. She quickly held onto the sofa to steady herself, her face turning pale.
Sometimes, fate is unchangeable. The rain outside grew heavier, the raindrops hitting the window like a symphony, making her feel less tense and her whole body relaxed. Emily lay on the bed with her eyes closed, forcing herself to sleep. Perhaps because she had been watching Alex's last moments all day, her dreams were filled with those scenes. Emily woke up with a start, sitting up straight.
Her nightgown was soaked with cold sweat, and her hands and feet were icy cold.
Emily grabbed Mr. Johnson's sleeve with a smile.
Mr. Johnson, what you did to me went beyond our agreement. The price needs to go up.
James shook off her hand, his face showing disgust.
I remember your boyfriend's family is quite wealthy. Why can't they come up with a mere $10,000, forcing you to work here?
Emily smiled bitterly inside. She had no boyfriend, the only person she ever liked was him.
Mr. Johnson, you're asking too many questions. Or are you planning to renege on the deal?
James looked at her for a moment, then took out his phone to arrange for the money and walked away. She never expected that the person who would come in would be David. David sat calmly on the sofa, leisurely observing Sophia's current disheveled state, but his eyes never glanced at her. David was a gentleman, so Sophia assumed he wouldn't dare do anything to her.
TSK, David, I thought you loved Emily so much. But here you are. Are you tired of her already?
David's lips curled into a faint smile as he brushed away her wandering hand. He then wiped the spot she touched with a tissue.
Sophia, your retribution has come. Emily is soft-hearted and unwilling to do many things, but I don't mind doing them for her.
He smiled slightly, but the coldness in his eyes was chilling.
You must be feeling very warm now, right? Don't worry, there are plenty of men to satisfy your needs.
Before Sophia could react to what he meant, 3 men suddenly burst in from outside.
David strode away, and as he walked down the hallway, he heard Sophia's cries of distress. He simply tossed the tissue in his hand into the trash without looking back. Everything ended there. Sophia received her punishment. Emily had arranged everything and boarded the plane without looking back, leaving only the words goodbye. James received the package Emily sent before she left, which included a recording and a letter. The recording was a conversation between Emily and Mrs. Johnson in a restaurant. After listening, James's expression changed dramatically. He opened the envelope, which contained the following words.
James, it was your mother who couldn't accept me. I couldn't protect our first child, but I've raised Alex well. I really wanted to grow old with you, but it seems I won't have that chance. Please take care of Lily.
It was then that James realized Lily was his child. James frantically drove to find David.
You're too late.
Before James could speak, David handed him a diagnosis report.
Emily was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and held on until now. She chose to go to a quiet place.
David patted his shoulder.
Since she didn't want you to find her, you won't. The only thing you can do is raise Lily well and not let her down.
James didn't believe it. He searched many places but found no trace of her. Standing by the sea with Lily, father and daughter gazed into the distance. Since Emily left, James had grown a beard, looking like he had been through a lot.
Daddy, when can I see Mommy?
James knelt down, looking at her face, which resembled Emily's by 7 points. His heart softened, and he hugged her.
Sweetheart, we will find Mommy.
But deep down, James knew he had truly lost Emily. In this life, they had missed their chance. He could only hope that in the next life, they could grow old together.